In the vast darkness between stars, where ancient empires rise and fall like waves upon cosmic shores, there exists a truth that terrifies even the most powerful beings in the galaxy: humans do not forget. They do not forgive. And, most importantly, they do not abandon those they love. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Council believed they had solved their human problem. The species that had once threatened to unite the galaxy under their strange concepts of equality and justice had been scattered, their homeworld destroyed, their champions eliminated. Peace, they claimed, had finally returned to civilized space. They were wrong. Some bonds transcend time itself. Some promises echo through the void long after those who made them have turned to dust. And, sometimes, just sometimes, love proves stronger than death, more persistent than extinction, and more terrifying than any weapon ever forged. The Queen was supposed to be dead. The human she once loved was supposed to be forgotten. But, legends have a way of returning when the galaxy needs them most, or fears them most. What happens when an immortal being discovers that the one soul she treasured above all others has found a way to cheat death itself? What happens when 2 forces of nature, separated by time and tragedy, are finally reunited in a universe that has tried to erase them both? The Council is about to learn that some stories never truly end. They simply wait for the right moment to begin again. The observation deck of the Nexus station stretched before Queen Lyralii like a crystal cathedral, its transparent walls offering an unobstructed view of the swirling nebula that had become her prison and her sanctuary. 300 years of exile had not dimmed the ethereal beauty that marked her as one of the ancient Valdari, though the weight of centuries showed in the way she held herself, like a statue carved from living starlight and sorrow. Her fingers traced the edge of a small holoframe that flickered with the image of a man whose features had been burned into her memory across the long decades. Dark hair, eyes the color of Earth's lost oceans, and a smile that had once made her believe that even immortal beings could find happiness. Marcus Chen, the human diplomat who had changed everything, who had shown her that love could bridge the gap between species, between the mortal and the eternal. Marcus Chen, who had died defending her people when the Council's war fleets had come calling. "Your Majesty," came a voice from behind her, soft and respectful. Kethvar, her aide and one of the few who remembered the old days, approached with the careful steps of someone who had learned to read her moods across the centuries. "The latest intelligence reports have arrived from our contacts in Council space." Lyralii didn't turn from the window. She had been expecting this moment, had felt it building in the cosmic currents that her people could sense like weather patterns. The galaxy was shifting, old powers stirring, and whispers of something that shouldn't exist were beginning to reach even her isolated corner of space. "Tell me," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority that had once commanded fleets and shaped the fate of worlds. "There are rumors, Your Majesty. Ships appearing in systems where no ships should be. Trade routes being protected by vessels that match no known configuration in any fleet database. Pirates and raiders disappearing without distress calls, their ships found days later drifting empty in space." Lyralii's reflection in the crystal showed a slight tightening around her luminous eyes. "Go on." "The patterns are unusual. These ghost ships seem to be protecting civilian vessels, focusing their attention on the same trade routes that were most important during the old Terran expansion." "But, Majesty, that makes no sense. The humans have been extinct for 3 centuries. Their worlds are dead, their colonies scattered to the void." Now she did turn, her movement fluid and precise. Kethvar had served her since before the war, had watched her transform from a young princess eager to explore the galaxy into the exile queen who ruled over a kingdom of memories and regrets. He knew her well enough to recognize the dangerous light that had appeared in her eyes. "Show me everything," she commanded. The next hour passed in a blur of holographic displays and data streams. Shipping manifests, patrol reports, survivor testimonies when there were any. The picture that emerged was tantalizingly incomplete, like trying to see a constellation through thick clouds. But Lyralii had not survived 3 centuries of exile by ignoring patterns others missed. The ghost ships always appeared when civilian vessels were in distress. They never lingered long enough for detailed scans. Their tactics showed a familiarity with Council patrol routes and response times that suggested either extensive intelligence gathering or something else. Something that made her ancient heart race with a possibility she didn't dare voice. "Kethvar, do you remember the Chen Doctrine?" Her aide's expression shifted, surprise and understanding warring across his weathered features. The human military philosophy about distributed resistance networks? Of course, Majesty. It was one of the key factors that made the war so difficult for the Council. Even after they destroyed Earth, human forces continued operating from hidden bases for decades. And what was the core principle behind it? That no single point of failure could destroy the entire network. That by creating autonomous cells with shared objectives but independent command structures, a resistance could theoretically operate indefinitely, even if the original leadership was eliminated. Kethvar paused, his eyes widening as he began to understand her line of thinking. But, Majesty, surely you don't believe. I believe that humans were the most stubborn species this galaxy has ever produced, Lyralei said softly. I believe that they had a saying about death and taxes being the only certainties, and that they spent most of their existence finding ways around both. And I believe that Marcusjan was too smart and too devoted to leave things to chance. She moved to the primary console, her fingers dancing across controls that called up star charts spanning half the galaxy. The view shifted, zooming in on a sector that had been marked as dead space for almost 300 years. What had once been the Terran colonial zone now showed nothing but empty systems and asteroids that had once been worlds. Set course for the Kepler Memorial Sector, she ordered. Your Majesty, that region has been under Council interdiction for centuries. If they detect our presence there, then they'll learn that some queens don't stay in their cages forever. The smile that crossed her face was sharp enough to cut starlight. Besides, I suspect we won't be alone out there. The next several days passed in preparation and anticipation. Lyralei's ship, the Star Weaver, had been her home and sanctuary for 3 centuries, its sleek lines and adaptive camouflage systems a testament to Valdari engineering at its finest. More importantly, it carried modifications that Marcus had helped design during the brief time when their peoples had been allies instead of enemies, systems that would let them slip through Council detection networks like smoke through a net. As they approached the border of the interdicted zone, Lyralei found herself spending more and more time on the observation deck, staring out at stars that held too many memories. She remembered the first time Marcus had stood beside her here, marveling at the view and asking endless questions about stellar navigation and Valdari philosophy. He had been curious about everything, that wonderful human trait that had made him both an excellent diplomat and a dangerous enemy to those who preferred the galaxy's power structures to remain unchanged. Contact on long-range sensors, came the announcement from the bridge. Configuration unknown, but it's maintaining position at the edge of the interdicted zone. Lyralei's pulse quickened. On screen. The image that appeared before her was strange and somehow familiar at the same time. The ship was clearly human in design, but wrong in ways that suggested either extensive modifications or technological evolution. Its hull showed the angular, efficient lines that had characterized Terran vessels, but the materials were unlike anything in the historical databases. Dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, with subtle curves that spoke of centuries of refinement. They're scanning us, reported the bridge officer. Passive sensors only, very sophisticated. I'm reading energy signatures that I don't recognize. Open a channel, Lyralei ordered, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The response came not as words but as a data burst, a complex mathematical sequence that made her aide scramble for the translation protocols. But Lyralei didn't need translation. She recognized the pattern immediately, because she had helped create it 3 centuries ago when she and Marcus had developed a private communication method for their clandestine meetings. The message was simple and devastating in its implications. Hello, beautiful. I told you I'd find a way back to you. Kethvar's face went pale as he realized what he was seeing. Your Majesty, that's impossible. Even if he had survived somehow, humans don't live that long. Their technology couldn't. Their technology couldn't, no, Lyralei agreed, her eyes never leaving the screen. But Marcusjan always said that impossible was just another word for a problem that hadn't been solved yet. The unknown ship began moving toward them, its approach careful and unthreatening. As it drew closer, more details became visible. The hull bore scars that spoke of countless battles, but also bore symbols that made Lyralei's breath catch in her throat. Etched into the dark metal were inscriptions in both human standard and High Valdari, phrases that only two beings in the galaxy would know the significance of. "Permission to come aboard," came the next message, this time in Marcus's voice, though something about it was different. Richer, more complex, as if layers of experience had been added to the familiar tone. "Granted," Lyralii whispered, then, stronger, "granted." Bay 3. She was moving before she realized it, rushing through corridors she had walked for 3 centuries but, which suddenly, felt like they led to a different universe entirely. Behind her, Kethvar called out warnings about security protocols and the possibility of elaborate council deceptions, but she barely heard him. The docking bay filled with the soft hum of air circulation as the unknown ship settled into the berth. It was smaller than it had appeared on screen, clearly designed for a minimal crew, but the technology visible through its transparent sections was unlike anything she had ever seen. Organic curves blended with mechanical precision, creating something that looked almost alive. The airlock cycled, and Lyralii found herself holding her breath. The figure that stepped through was human in general outline, but wrong in ways that spoke of fundamental changes. Taller than Marcus had been, broader through the shoulders, moving with a fluid grace that suggested either extensive physical modification or something even more radical. The face, when he finally looked up, was recognizably his but changed in ways that made her heart race and her mind rebel against what she was seeing. "Hello, Lyralii," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered and completely different at the same time. "I'm sorry I'm late." She stared at him for a long moment, taking in the details that her immortal memory compared against images 3 centuries old. The same eyes, but deeper somehow, holding depths that spoke of experiences no mortal should have accumulated. The same smile, but sadder, as if touched by losses that even she couldn't imagine. And, beneath it all, something that her Valdari senses recognized but couldn't quite classify. He was human, but also something more, something that shouldn't exist. "You died," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw the reports. Your ship was destroyed defending the evacuation fleet from Kepler Prime." "I did die," he agreed, stepping closer. "Several times, actually. It took a while to get the process right." "That's impossible. So was a Valdari queen falling in love with a human diplomat, but we managed that too." His smile widened, and, for a moment he looked exactly like the man she remembered. "The galaxy got very good at telling us what was impossible, Lyralii. We got very good at proving it wrong." She reached out with one trembling hand, stopping just short of touching his face. "How?" "That," he said, gently taking her hand in his, "is a very long story. And we have a lot of catching up to do." The touch of his skin against hers sent shockwaves through her enhanced senses. He was warm, alive, unmistakably real. But underneath the familiar sensation was something else, something that spoke of changes so fundamental that her mind struggled to process them. "Marcus," she breathed. "Still me," he assured her. "Just improved. We learned a lot about the nature of consciousness in the last 3 centuries. About the relationship between mind and body, about what it really means to be human. Turns out we were thinking too small." Behind them, Kethvar cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should move this reunion somewhere more private? If the Council has listening posts in this sector." Marcus glanced at him, and Lyralii saw her aide take an involuntary step backward. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke of power held in careful check. "The Council isn't monitoring this sector anymore," Marcus said calmly. "We've been jamming their surveillance networks for the past 50 years. This entire region is under our protection now." "Our protection?" Lyralii asked. "You didn't think I was working alone, did you?" His grin was pure mischief, the same expression she remembered from their clandestine meetings when they had been planning ways to convince their respective governments to consider peace. "Humans are social creatures, Lyralii. We work better in groups." Before she could ask what he meant, alerts began sounding throughout the ship. On the communications panel, Kethvar's expression shifted from nervous to terrified as he read the incoming reports. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm reading multiple contacts throughout the system. Dozens of ships, all using the same unknown configuration. They're everywhere." Marcus nodded approvingly. Right on schedule. I told them to give us a few minutes for the initial reunion, but they've been eager to meet you properly. It's been a long time since any of them have seen a friendly face. Lyralii moved to the observation windows, her enhanced vision picking out the running lights of ships that seemed to materialize out of empty space. They moved with perfect coordination, their formations speaking of decades of shared experience and tactical evolution. As her eyes adjusted, she began to make out details that made her breath catch. Each ship bore the same dark hull configuration as Marcus's vessel. Each carried the same impossible blend of human and unknown technologies. And each, according to the sensor readings that Kethvar was frantically trying to process, showed life signs that defied every scientific principle she knew. "How many?" she asked quietly. "Here?" "About 200, Marcus said casually. "But this is just the local patrol fleet. The main population centers are deeper in the sector, in systems the Council thinks are dead space." "Main population centers?" "Lyralii," he said, moving to stand beside her at the window, "what do you think we've been doing for 300 years? Just because the Council destroyed our original worlds doesn't mean we stopped being human. We adapt. We overcome. We rebuild." She stared out at the impossible fleet, her mind reeling with implications. The Council believes humanity is extinct. The Council believes a lot of things that aren't true. We've found it useful to let them continue believing this particular misconception. Marcus's expression grew serious. "But things are changing. The galaxy has been under their control for too long, and the price of their peace is becoming unacceptable. Other species are beginning to remember that there used to be alternatives." "And you think you can challenge them?" "The Council commands thousands of worlds, millions of ships." "Numbers," Marcus said dismissively. "They've grown fat and comfortable, relying on intimidation and overwhelming force. They've forgotten how to fight an enemy that refuses to stand still and be counted." Lyralii studied his profile, seeing echoes of the man she had loved overlaid with something harder, more dangerous. "What do you want from me?" "Want? Nothing." He turned to face her fully, his eyes serious. "I came here because I promised you I would find a way back. Because in 300 years of fighting and surviving and changing, the one constant has been the memory of what we had together. Because even if you've moved on, even if you've forgotten what we meant to each other, I needed you to know that some promises transcend death itself." The sincerity in his voice hit her like a physical blow. For all the impossible changes, for all the technological marvels and strategic implications, this was still the man who had risked everything for love, who had shown her that connection could bridge any gap. "Moved on," she repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "Marcus, I've spent 3 centuries in exile, refusing every alliance and marriage proposal, because nothing and no one could replace what we had. I've built my entire existence around the memory of 6 months when the universe made sense." His expression softened, and, for a moment she saw past the changes to the core of who he had always been. "Then, we have a lot of lost time to make up for." "Your Majesty," Kethvar interrupted urgently, "I'm receiving a priority transmission from the Council's enforcement fleet. They're demanding to know our business in the interdicted zone, and they're dispatching a battle group to investigate." Marcus glanced at the communications panel, his expression shifting to something that made Lyralii's blood run cold. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Signal the fleet. Let them know we have visitors coming. And send a message to the Council ships. This is Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Remnant. They are trespassing in human space. They have exactly 1 hour to withdraw or face the consequences." Kethvar stared at him in shock. "Admiral? But the Terran military was disbanded centuries ago." "No," Marcus said quietly, his eyes never leaving Lyralii's face. "It was reorganized. And now it's time for the galaxy to remember why humans were considered dangerous in the first place." Outside the windows, the impossible fleet began to move, their formations shifting with mechanical precision. In the distance, space itself seemed to ripple as more ships emerged from whatever hiding places they had occupied. Lyralii realized that she was witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. The Council's 3 centuries of absolute power were about to face a challenge they thought they had eliminated long ago. And, at the center of it all was the man she had never stopped loving, returned from the dead with an army of ghosts and a score to settle with the galaxy itself. The Council's enforcement fleet arrived exactly 57 minutes later, their massive dreadnoughts dropping out of hyperspace with the kind of overwhelming display of force that had kept the galaxy in line for 3 centuries. 12 ships, each capable of sterilizing a planet, their hulls gleaming with the arrogance of unchallenged power. Lyrelii watched from the bridge of the Star Weaver as the impossible confrontation unfolded before her. On one side, the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known. On the other, a collection of ships that shouldn't exist, commanded by a man who should have been dust centuries ago. "This is Fleet Admiral Karath of the Council Enforcement Division," came the transmission, the voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You are in violation of Interdiction Protocol 7. Identify yourself and prepare to be boarded." Marcus stood at the center of the human formation, his ship somehow managing to project an aura of calm confidence despite being dwarfed by the Council dreadnoughts. When he responded, his voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Admiral Karath, this is Admiral Chen. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This sector was never ceded to the Council. It remains sovereign Terran space, and you're the ones in violation here." The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute. Lyrelii could imagine the confusion on the Council bridge as officers tried to process what they had just heard. The official records clearly stated that humanity was extinct, their space claimed by right of conquest. "Repeat your identification," Karath finally demanded, his voice tight with controlled anger. Terran authority was dissolved 300 years ago following the complete destruction of Earth and all human colonial worlds. Dissolved? Marcus sounded genuinely amused. "Admiral, I think you'll find that reports of our dissolution have been greatly exaggerated. We've simply been reorganizing." Lyrelii found herself holding her breath as the two fleets faced each other across the void. The tactical displays showed what should have been an absurdly one-sided engagement. The Council ships outmassed the human vessels by orders of magnitude, their weapons and shields representing the pinnacle of galactic military technology. But, as she watched, something began to change in the sensor readings. The space around the human ships started to shimmer with energy patterns that her instruments couldn't identify. The vessels themselves seemed to be shifting, their configurations becoming more complex, more dangerous. "Fascinating," Kethvar murmured from his position at the sensor station. "Majesty, I'm reading massive power buildups from the human vessels, but the energy signatures don't match any known weapon systems." "That's because they're not weapons," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly over their communications link. "At least, not in the traditional sense. We learned a long time ago that the Council's advantages came from thinking in conventional terms. So we stopped thinking conventionally." On the main display, the lead Council dreadnought was beginning to maneuver into an attack position, its massive weapon systems powering up with the characteristic energy signature of planet-killer armaments. Lyrelii had seen those weapons in action during the war, had watched them reduce entire worlds to glowing debris. "Unknown vessels," Karatha's voice had taken on the hard edge of someone preparing for violence. "You have 30 seconds to stand down and prepare for boarding. This is your final warning." "Counteroffer," Marcus replied calmly. "You have 30 seconds to withdraw from human space before we demonstrate why the Council was so eager to declare us extinct." The countdown felt like an eternity. Lyrelii found herself gripping the edge of her command chair, her enhanced senses picking up the tension that filled the bridge like an electrical charge. Around her, her crew watched the displays with the fascination of witnesses to history. At exactly 30 seconds, two things happened simultaneously. The Council flagship fired, its primary weapons array unleashing enough destructive energy to vaporize a city. The beam lanced across space with the inevitability of a natural disaster, aimed directly at Marcus's vessel. And Marcus's ship simply wasn't there anymore. It didn't dodge, didn't accelerate away from the attack. One moment it existed in normal space, the next it had stepped sideways into somewhere else entirely. The energy beam passed harmlessly through empty space while the impossible vessel reappeared behind the Council formation, its own weapons coming online. "What in the void was that?" Kethvar breathed. "Phase transition technology," Marcus's voice explained, as casual as if he were discussing the weather. It took us about 50 years to crack the theoretical framework, another 100 to build working prototypes. Turns out that when you're forced to survive in the deep void, you develop some interesting perspectives on the nature of space and time. The human ship's weapons fired, but not at the Council vessels. Instead, streams of exotic energy reached out to touch each dreadnought in turn, spreading across their hulls like living things. Within seconds, the massive ships began to slow, their engines failing, their weapons powering down. Systems virus, Marcus continued conversationally. Another little innovation we developed during our extended exile. Your ship's computers are now running our code instead of yours. Don't worry, we're not going to hurt anyone. We're just going to send you home with a message. Admiral Karatha's voice, when it came, was thick with rage and disbelief. This is impossible. No single species possesses technology this advanced. You're absolutely right, Marcus agreed. No single species does. Fortunately, humans have never been particularly good at following other people's rules about what's possible. Lyralii watched in amazement as the proud Council fleet found itself completely helpless, their ship's systems controlled by an enemy they couldn't even target. But her enhanced senses were picking up something else, something that made her ancient blood run cold. The energy signatures from the human ships weren't entirely technological. There was something else there, something organic, something that reminded her of the deep mysteries her own people had abandoned millennia ago. Marcus, she said quietly, opening a private channel, what have you done to yourselves? His response came back immediately, tinged with something that might have been sadness. What we had to do to survive, Lyralii. What we had to become to ensure that the Council's version of peace never goes unchallenged again. Before she could ask what he meant, another voice cut across all frequencies. This one was female, carrying an authority that made even Admiral Karath fall silent. This is Counselor Vexhai of the High Council. To the being claiming to be Admiral Chen, your masquerade has gone far enough. Present yourself for identity verification or face the consequences of impersonating a dead hero. Marcus's laughter, when it came, held no humor at all. Hello, Vexhai. I was wondering when you'd show up. Still hiding behind other people's courage, I see. Impossible, the counselor hissed. I watched your ship burn. I confirmed your death personally. You confirmed the death of a body, Marcus corrected. But humanity has always been more than just flesh and bone. We're ideas, dreams, stubborn refusal to accept limitations. You destroyed our worlds, scattered our people, thought you had solved the problem of human ambition. But you forgot the most important thing about us. Which is, we learn from our mistakes. The space around the human fleet began to change, reality itself seeming to bend and twist. Lyralii's instruments went crazy as sensors tried to process what they were seeing. Ships that had been clearly mechanical were now showing biosigns, as if the vessels themselves were alive. Energy patterns that defied physics danced between the hulls like aurora made of starlight. The thing is, Vexhai, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, humans have had 300 years to think about what went wrong the first time. 300 years to evolve, to adapt, to become something that your council couldn't eliminate with conventional warfare. You're talking about abominations, Vexhai snarled. Violations of natural law. We're talking about survival, Marcus shot back. About refusing to let tyrants dictate the terms of existence. About becoming something greater than the sum of our parts. Lyralii opened a secure channel to Marcus's ship, her voice urgent. What are you, Marcus? What have you become? The silence stretched for a moment before he answered. Do you remember that conversation we had about consciousness, Lyralii? About whether the mind was truly separate from the body, or if they were just different aspects of the same thing? She did remember. It had been during one of their late-night discussions in the diplomatic quarters, when they had been exploring the philosophical differences between their species. Marcus had been fascinated by the Valdari concept of consciousness as an energy field that could exist independent of physical form. You're not saying you've learned to transfer human consciousness into artificial bodies? Not transfer, Marcus corrected. Expand. Enhance. Evolve. We've learned to exist as pure information when necessary, to inhabit multiple forms, to share experiences and knowledge across vast networks. We've become what we needed to become to ensure our species' survival. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The entire Terran remnant is a collective consciousness with individual nodes, Marcus confirmed. We're still human, still individual, but we're also something more. Something that can survive the destruction of individual ships, individual bodies, individual worlds. Something that learns from every battle, every defeat, every small victory. On the main display, the Council ships were beginning to regain control of their systems, but it was too late. The human fleet was already moving, their impossible ships phase-shifting through space with casual disregard for the laws of physics. They weren't retreating, Lyralii realized with growing alarm. They were positioning themselves for something much more dramatic. Counselor, Marcus's voice carried across all frequencies, formal now and implacable, I want you to return to the High Council with a message. The galaxy has changed in the 3 centuries since you thought you eliminated humanity. Other species have begun to question whether the Council's peace is worth the price they're paying for it. Some of them have even reached out to us, asking for alternatives. The Council will never negotiate with terrorists and abominations. The Council will negotiate, Marcus said with absolute certainty, or the Council will find out what 3 centuries of human innovation looks like when it's applied to the problem of regime change. We're not the same species you fought before, Vexi. We don't think in terms of individual worlds or even individual star systems anymore. We think in terms of galactic reformation. To emphasize his point, the human ships began to demonstrate capabilities that defied every principle of known science. They moved through space like living things, their forms flowing and changing as needed. They appeared in multiple locations simultaneously, suggesting either transportation methods beyond current understanding or the ability to exist in several places at once. This is what we offer the galaxy, Marcus continued. Not conquest, but choice. Not subjugation, but cooperation. The Council has ruled through fear and overwhelming force for too long. It's time for something different. Admiral Karatha's voice, when it came, was tight with barely controlled panic. Counselor, we need reinforcements. This technology, it's beyond anything in our databases. There won't be any reinforcements, Marcus said calmly. Because this isn't an invasion, Admiral. It's a demonstration. We want the Council to understand exactly what they're dealing with before they make any decisions about how to proceed. The human fleet began to withdraw, their ships fading back into whatever dimensional space they used for concealment. But, before they disappeared entirely, Marcus sent one final transmission. Lyralii, we need to talk. Privately. There are things you need to know about what's coming, about the choice you're going to have to make. She found herself nodding even though she knew he couldn't see her. The reunion she had dreamed of for 3 centuries had become something far more complex and dangerous than she had ever imagined. I'll follow you, she responded. No, came his immediate reply. Not to our main bases. Not until you've decided whether you can accept what we've become. There's a neutral location, coordinates incoming. Meet me there in 12 hours. The transmission ended, leaving Lyralii staring out at empty space where the impossible fleet had been. Around her, her crew worked frantically to process what they had witnessed, to file reports that would somehow convey the magnitude of what had just occurred. Your Majesty, Kethvar said quietly, what are your orders? She continued to stare out at the stars, thinking about love and loss, about the price of survival and the weight of choice. Somewhere out there was the man she had never stopped loving, transformed into something that challenged her understanding of what it meant to be human, to be alive, to be real. Set course for the coordinates, she said finally. And, prepare a secure message to the Valdari High Court. They need to know that the galaxy is about to change, whether we're ready for it or not. As the Star Weaver changed course, heading toward a rendezvous that would determine the fate of civilizations, Lyralii found herself wondering if love could survive the kind of fundamental transformation that Marcus and his people had undergone. She had waited 3 centuries for his return. Now she would discover if the person she had been waiting for still existed, or if she was about to fall in love with someone entirely new. The rendezvous point was a dead system on the edge of nowhere, its primary star having long since collapsed into a white dwarf that cast everything in harsh, cold light. 3 planets remained in decaying orbits, their surfaces scoured clean by cosmic radiation and the passage of eons. It was the kind of place where secrets could be shared without fear of observation, where 2 beings could speak honestly about impossible things. Lyralii arrived first, the Star Weaver taking up position near the largest planetary fragment. Her sensors showed no signs of life, no energy signatures, nothing to indicate that this wasteland had ever hosted anything more complex than mineral deposits and vacuum. But she knew Marcus would come. He always kept his promises, even when they took 3 centuries to fulfill. She didn't have to wait long. Space folded in on itself with a barely audible whisper, and his ship emerged from whatever dimension the human remnant used for travel. It was different again, she noticed. The configuration had changed since their encounter at the interdicted zone, as if the vessel were constantly adapting to new requirements. Permission to come aboard, came his familiar voice, though she could hear the tension beneath the casual request. Always, she replied, then added more formally, Bay 2 is clear for docking. This time she waited for him in her private quarters rather than rushing to the docking bay. She needed time to think, to prepare for whatever revelations he was about to share. The last few hours had given her time to process what she had witnessed, and the implications were staggering. If Marcus was telling the truth about the nature of the Terran remnant, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about consciousness, about life and death, about the fundamental nature of existence itself, was wrong. The philosophical discussions they had shared 3 centuries ago had apparently become reality, with consequences that even her immortal imagination struggled to encompass. When he arrived at her quarters, she was struck again by how much and how little he had changed. The physical form was recognizably his, but there were subtle differences that her enhanced senses picked up. The way he moved suggested perfect control over every muscle, every neural pathway. His eyes held depths that spoke of experiences no single lifetime could accumulate. And, beneath it all, that strange energy signature that her instruments couldn't quite classify. You have questions, he said, settling into the chair across from her with the easy familiarity of someone who had sat there many times before. I can see them in your eyes. I have 1,000 questions, she admitted. But, I suppose the most important one is, are you still you? Or are you something wearing Marcus Chen's face? His smile was sad but genuine. I'm still me, Lyralii. But, I'm also more than I was. It's like, imagine if you could remember not just your own experiences, but the experiences of everyone you'd ever met. Imagine if you could think not just with your own mind, but with the combined intelligence of your entire species. I'm Marcus Chen, but I'm also part of something larger. The collective consciousness you mentioned. Not in the way you're thinking, he said quickly. We're not a hive mind. Each of us maintains our individual personality, our unique perspectives, our personal memories and emotions. But we can also share experiences when we choose to, pool our knowledge for complex problems, exist as pure information when our physical forms are destroyed. She studied his face, looking for traces of the man she had loved. Show me. Show you what? What you've become. If you want me to understand, if you want me to accept this, then show me the truth. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face. It might frighten you. The first time we made the transition, some of our people couldn't handle the experience. The human mind wasn't designed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. I've lived for over 2,000 years, Lyralii said dryly. I think I can handle whatever you've become. He nodded slowly, then closed his eyes. All right. But, remember, you asked for this. The change was subtle at first, like watching reality shift slightly out of focus. The air around Marcus began to shimmer with energy patterns that reminded her of her own people's deep meditative states, but far more complex. His physical form remained solid, but something else became visible overlaying it, like a double exposure made of thought and light. Lyralii gasped as her enhanced senses picked up what he was showing her. It wasn't just Marcus in the chair across from her. It was Marcus and hundreds of other individuals, their consciousness linked but distinct, their experiences and knowledge flowing together like streams joining a river. She could sense their emotions, their memories, their individual personalities all existing simultaneously in a network that spanned light years. "We call it the long dream," Marcus said, his voice now carrying harmonics that spoke of multiple speakers. "It's what we became when we realized that individual death was just another limitation to overcome. When one of us dies, their consciousness is preserved in the network. When one of us learns something new, all of us can benefit from that knowledge. We're still human, but we're human in a way that transcends the limitations of individual flesh." The experience was overwhelming and terrifying and beautiful all at once. Lyralii could feel the vast intelligence behind his eyes, the accumulated wisdom of a species that had refused to accept extinction. But she could also feel something else, something that made her heart race with recognition and joy. "The you I knew," she whispered. "He's still there." "He's still here," Marcus agreed, and suddenly, it was just him again, the overwhelming presence of the collective fading back to whatever space it normally occupied. "The part of me that loved you, that promised to find a way back to you, that dreamed of a galaxy where different species could work together instead of competing for dominance. That's still the core of who I am. But you're also something more. We're what we had to become to survive," he said simply. "After Earth fell, after the Council's fleets scattered our people to the void, we had a choice. We could die as individuals, letting our species fade into extinction, or we could evolve into something that couldn't be destroyed by conventional warfare." Lyralii leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling with the implications. "How many of you are there?" "Define us," Marcus said with a slight smile. "Individual consciousness nodes? About 50 million. Physical bodies capable of independent action? Maybe a tenth of that. Ships, bases, installations that can serve as platforms for our consciousness? Several thousand. We've learned to exist in many forms simultaneously." 50 million, she repeated numbly. "The Council thinks humanity is extinct, but there are 50 million of you out there. Hidden in the deep void, in systems the Council considers worthless, in dimensions they don't know how to access. We've been building, learning, preparing for the day when we'd be strong enough to offer the galaxy an alternative to the Council's rule." "And that day is now?" Marcus nodded gravely. "The Council's power is beginning to crack. Species that have been subjugated for centuries are starting to remember that there used to be other ways of organizing galactic society. Trade federations, mutual defense pacts, voluntary confederations. The Council stamped out all of those alternatives, but they didn't eliminate the memory of them." "And you think you can provide those alternatives?" "I know we can," Marcus said with absolute certainty. "We've spent 3 centuries studying the Council's weaknesses, developing technologies they can't counter, building relationships with species they've marginalized. We're not planning a war, Lyralii. We're planning a revolution." The weight of what he was telling her settled over Lyralii like a blanket of lead. She had wanted her lost love to return, had dreamed of their reunion for 300 years. She had never imagined that his return would come with the responsibility of reshaping galactic civilization. "What do you want from me?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," Marcus said immediately. "I came back because I promised I would, because even after everything we've become, the part of me that loves you has never changed. If you want to return to your exile, to forget you ever saw us, I'll understand. But if you want to help, if you want to be part of building something better than what the Council offers, then we could use your support. The Valdari are still respected throughout the galaxy, even in exile. Your word carries weight with species that remember the old alliances." Lyralii stood and moved to the viewport, staring out at the dead system that surrounded them. In the distance, she could see the white dwarf that had once been a living star, its collapsed form still radiating the heat of its former glory. A fitting metaphor for the conversation they were having. "The Council will fight this," she said finally. "They won't give up 3 centuries of absolute power without a struggle that could tear the galaxy apart." "They'll try," Marcus agreed. "But they're fighting the last war, thinking in terms of fleets and planets and traditional conquest. We've moved beyond that. We can exist in spaces they can't reach, strike at targets they can't defend, offer hope to people they've taught to despair." "And if you fail? If this revolution of yours collapses?" Then, we fade back into the void and wait for another opportunity, Marcus said simply. We're very good at being patient now. Time moves differently when you're not bound by the limitations of individual lifespans. Lyralii turned back to face him, studying the man who had become something unprecedented in galactic history. There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me yet. His expression grew serious, and she saw a flash of the old Marcus, the diplomat who had always been more honest than was politically wise. The revolution has already begun, he admitted. What you witnessed in the interdicted zone was just the opening move. Right now, across 12 sectors, Council installations are discovering that their computer systems have been compromised. Trade ships that have been paying protection fees to Council enforcers are finding themselves escorted by vessels that answer to no known authority. Pirates who have been raiding with Council permission are disappearing without trace. You're forcing the issue. We're creating the conditions for change, Marcus corrected. The galaxy is ready for an alternative to the Council's rule, but change requires catalysts. We're providing those catalysts. Before Lyralii could respond, her ship's communications system came alive with urgent transmissions from across the galaxy. Emergency broadcasts from Council stations, trade alerts about disrupted shipping lanes, military channels buzzing with reports of impossible encounters. It's starting, Marcus said, standing and moving to join her at the viewport. The question is, do you want to watch from the sidelines, or do you want to help shape what comes next? Lyralii stared out at the stars, thinking about 3 centuries of exile, about the weight of being the last free Valdari queen, about the responsibility that came with power and the loneliness that came with immortality. She thought about the man standing beside her, changed beyond recognition but still somehow the same person who had shown her that love could bridge any gap. If I join you, she said slowly, what happens to my people? The Valdari who have followed me into exile, who have trusted me to keep them safe. They become part of something larger, Marcus replied. Not absorbed, not diminished, but enhanced. We've learned that diversity of thought and experience makes us stronger, not weaker. Your people's knowledge, their technology, their perspective would make the network more than it is. And my autonomy? My ability to make decisions for my people? Remains intact. The network doesn't eliminate individual agency, Lyralii. It amplifies it. Imagine being able to consult with the combined experience of 50 million individuals when making difficult decisions, while still retaining the final choice. She was quiet for a long time, weighing possibilities and consequences. Finally, she spoke. Show me, she said. Show me what the galaxy could become. Marcus nodded and, once again opened himself to the collective consciousness. But, this time, instead of just revealing the network to her enhanced senses, he projected something else. Visions of worlds where different species worked together as equals, where technology served all beings instead of just the powerful, where the vast resources of galactic civilization were used to explore and create rather than dominate and control. It was beautiful and terrifying and utterly convincing. All right, Lyralii said quietly. I'm in. Marcus's smile was radiant, and, for a moment he looked exactly like the young diplomat who had stolen her heart 3 centuries ago. Welcome to the revolution, Your Majesty. Let's go save the galaxy. The integration process began immediately. Not the violent assimilation that Lyralii had feared, but something gentler, more like an invitation than a conquest. Marcus guided her through the initial connection protocols, his consciousness serving as a bridge between her ancient Valdari neural patterns and the distributed human network that had evolved beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Relax, he said softly as strange energies began to flow between their minds. Don't try to control the process. Just let yourself experience what we've become. The sensation was unlike anything in Lyralii's 2 millennia of existence. Her consciousness, normally contained within the boundaries of her individual mind, began to expand. Not diluted or diminished, but enhanced, like a single voice joining a cosmic symphony. She could feel the presence of other minds, thousands of them, each retaining their distinct personality while contributing to a greater whole. The first contact was with Elena Vasquez, a former Terran Marine who had died defending a refugee convoy 2 centuries ago but whose consciousness lived on in the network. Through Elena's memories, Lyralii experienced the desperate early years after Earth's fall, the scrambling struggle to preserve human culture and knowledge in the face of seemingly inevitable extinction. Then came Dr. James Okafor, the scientist whose breakthrough in consciousness transfer had made their evolution possible. His memories showed her the theoretical framework behind the long dream, the elegant mathematics that had allowed human minds to exist as pure information while retaining their essential humanity. One by one, other presences made themselves known. Children who had died in the Council's bombardments but whose young minds had been preserved in the network's earliest days. Soldiers who had given their lives buying time for evacuation ships. Scientists, artists, engineers, teachers, all of them contributors to a collective consciousness that had become something greater than the sum of its parts. "We call ourselves the Eternal," Marcus explained as her awareness expanded to encompass the vast scope of their civilization. "Not because we're immortal in the traditional sense, but because the ideas and dreams that define humanity can't be killed by conventional weapons." Through the network's shared knowledge, Lyralii began to understand the true scope of what the Terran remnant had accomplished. Hidden bases carved into asteroids and rogue planets, their locations known only to the collective consciousness. Ships that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that the Council couldn't access. Technologies that blended human ingenuity with principles borrowed from a dozen different species, creating capabilities that defied every established scientific law. "The Council thinks in terms of controlling territory," Marcus continued, his voice now carrying the harmonics of multiple speakers. "But territory is just matter organized in space. We think in terms of controlling information, of existing in the spaces between established realities." The integration deepened, and Lyralii found herself experiencing memories that weren't her own. She saw the careful cultivation of relationships with species that the Council had marginalized. Trade agreements that existed in the shadows of official commerce. Mutual defense pacts with civilizations that the galaxy had forgotten. Slowly, patiently, the Eternal had been building an alternative to the Council's monolithic control. "The Zephyrian Mining Consortium," she said aloud, recognizing one of the networks. "I thought they were just a group of independent operators." "They are," Elena's presence confirmed through the link. "But they're also part of our extended family. We helped them organize, provided them with technology and intelligence. In return, they give us access to resources and information throughout the outer territories." "The hegemony of free traders?" "Another ally, Dr. Okafor added. "The Council considers them beneath notice, just small-time merchants moving consumer goods between backwater worlds. They don't realize that those merchants are also carrying messages, personnel, and strategic materials for our network." Lyralii's understanding expanded exponentially as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. It wasn't just humans who had survived the Council's attempt at genocide. It was an entire shadow civilization, a parallel power structure that had been growing quietly in the spaces that the established order ignored. "How many species are involved?" she asked. "Directly?" "About 30, Marcus replied. "Indirectly?" "Nearly every sentient species in the galaxy has some connection to our network, even if they don't realize it. The Council's rule has created a lot of resentment over the centuries. We've simply provided a way for that resentment to organize itself." The next phase of integration brought her into contact with the tactical awareness that guided their operations. Through thousands of linked minds, she could perceive the current state of galactic civilization in real time. Council fleets scrambling to respond to phantom threats. Trade routes being quietly redirected away from systems where the Eternal had taken control. Communication networks compromised so thoroughly that the Council's own messages were being filtered and modified before reaching their destinations. "You're not just planning a revolution," she realized with growing amazement. "You're already winning one." "We're creating the conditions for change," Marcus corrected. "The revolution itself has to come from the people who have been subjugated by the Council. We can provide tools, support, intelligence, but the decision to fight for freedom has to be made by each species individually." Through the network's enhanced senses, Lyralii could feel the pulse of galactic civilization. On Kepler 7, the Altarian Confederacy was quietly mobilizing their defense forces, testing weapons that had been provided by mysterious benefactors. In the Vega system, shipping guilds were coordinating strikes against Council taxation policies. Throughout the Outer Rim, species that had been conquered centuries ago were rediscovering the technologies and organizational structures they had lost. The Valdari could be a significant asset to this network, Elena observed through the link. Your people's knowledge of advanced energy manipulation could enhance our phase shift capabilities exponentially. And your diplomatic contacts throughout the galaxy, Dr. Okafor added. Many species still remember the old alliances, before the Council consolidated power. Your endorsement could legitimize resistance movements that have been afraid to act openly. Lyralii felt the collective attention of the network focusing on her, not with pressure but with genuine curiosity. These beings who had transcended death itself were asking for her help, not demanding it. The choice remained entirely hers. What would you need from my people? She asked. Nothing they're not willing to give, Marcus assured her. The network doesn't conscript or coerce. We're not trying to create another hegemony to replace the Council. We're trying to create a framework where different species can cooperate as equals. Through the shared consciousness, she experienced examples of how this cooperation functioned. Species with radically different biological and cultural backgrounds working together on projects that benefited everyone. Technologies being shared freely instead of hoarded as competitive advantages. Resources being allocated based on need rather than political influence. It was the galaxy she had dreamed of 3 centuries ago, when she had fallen in love with a human diplomat who believed that different species could transcend their limitations by working together. I need to consult with my people, she said finally. This decision affects more than just me. Of course, Marcus agreed, and the network's presence began to withdraw from her consciousness. Take all the time you need. The revolution has been building for 3 centuries. It can wait a little longer for your answer. But, as the connection faded, Lyralii realized that her time for deliberation might be shorter than Marcus implied. Through the network's intelligence-gathering capabilities, she had perceived something that made her blood run cold. The Council wasn't just scrambling to respond to the Eternals' opening moves. They were preparing something drastic, something that would change the nature of the conflict entirely. Marcus, she said urgently as he began to disengage from the link. There's something you need to know. The Council isn't just planning a conventional military response. His attention snapped back to full focus, and she felt the weight of the entire network turning to examine what she had perceived. Explain. Project Cleansing Flame, she said, accessing memories that had been shared through the connection. I caught traces of it in the intelligence data. The Council is planning to sterilize entire sectors, to eliminate any possibility of hidden populations by destroying everything that could possibly support life. The silence that followed was profound and terrible. Through the link, Lyralii could feel the horror and rage of 50 million human consciousnesses as they processed what she had revealed. They're going to commit genocide on a galactic scale, Elena whispered through the connection. Not if we stop them first, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute determination. How long do we have? Lyralii accessed the fragments of information she had gleaned from the network's intelligence sources. Based on the logistics involved, the preliminary bombardments could begin within weeks. But, Marcus, they're not just targeting human settlements. They're planning to eliminate any species or civilization that might potentially harbor your refugees. Including the Valdari, Dr. Okafor observed grimly. Including everyone who isn't directly under Council control, Lyralii confirmed. They've decided that the only way to ensure the Eternals' destruction is to remove every possible hiding place in the galaxy. Through the network connection, she felt the collective intelligence of the Terran remnant shift into what could only be described as war mode. Strategic assessments flowed through the link at light speed. Resource allocations were recalculated. Contingency plans that had been theoretical exercises became operational necessities. We need to accelerate the timeline, Marcus said, his consciousness now fully merged with the network's tactical processing centers. What was supposed to be a gradual transition to open conflict is going to have to become an all-out war. Can you win? Lyralii asked. We can try, came the collective response. But, not without help. Not without allies who are willing to stand up to the Council openly instead of supporting us from the shadows. The weight of the moment settled over Lyralii like a physical force. The choice she had thought she would have days or weeks to consider now had to be made immediately. Join the revolution openly and risk everything her people had built in exile, or watch as the Council's final solution eliminated any hope of freedom for anyone in the galaxy. "Send me back to my ship," she said finally. "I need to speak with my people, and we don't have time for extended deliberation." "Lyralii," Marcus said as the connection began to dissolve, "whatever you decide, know that I've never stopped loving you. Even if we can't be together, even if this is where our paths diverge again, you'll always be the most important part of who I am." "I know," she replied, feeling tears she hadn't shed in centuries beginning to form. "And, Marcus? That love goes both ways. It always has." As the link faded and she found herself alone in her quarters once again, Lyralii realized that the conversation she was about to have with her people would determine not just their own fate, but the fate of every free being in the galaxy. The revolution had begun in earnest. The only question now was whether it would succeed or whether the galaxy would burn in the attempt. The emergency assembly of the Valdari High Council convened within hours of Lyralii's return to the Star Weaver. Representatives from across her scattered people appeared as shimmering holograms in the Great Hall, their expressions ranging from curiosity to deep concern as they absorbed the preliminary reports of what their queen had witnessed. Elder Thalis, the most senior of her advisors, spoke first. "Your Majesty, if even half of what you're telling us is true, then everything we thought we knew about the current galactic situation is wrong." "Everything we thought we knew was wrong," Lyralii confirmed. "The humans aren't extinct. The Council's power isn't absolute. And we're about to be caught in the middle of a war that will determine whether freedom has any meaning in this galaxy." "A war started by abominations," Councillor Veltar interjected, his image flickering with agitation. "These Eternal, as they call themselves, have violated every natural law governing consciousness and identity. How do we know they're still truly sentient beings and not just sophisticated programs mimicking human behavior?" "Because I've been inside their network," Lyralii replied calmly. "I've felt their emotions, experienced their memories, witnessed their individual personalities. They're as real as we are, just organized differently." "And what do they want from us?" asked Elder Morthak, her ancient voice carrying the weight of millennia. "In my experience, beings with such power rarely seek allies. They seek servants. They want cooperation, not submission," Lyralii said. "They've offered us full autonomy within a larger network of free species. Our culture, our technology, our independence would all be preserved and enhanced." "Enhanced how?" Veltar demanded. "Access to technologies beyond anything we've developed. Shared knowledge from dozens of species. Protection from the Council's final solution, which includes the complete sterilization of this sector." The hall fell silent as the implications sank in. The Valdari had survived in exile by remaining beneath the Council's notice, but if Marcus was right about Project Cleansing Flame, then nowhere in the galaxy would be safe from the coming purge. "Show us," Elder Thalis said finally. "If these Eternal are truly what you believe them to be, then let us experience their network ourselves." Lyralii had expected this request. The Valdari were an ancient species, cautious by nature and suspicious of grand claims. They would need to verify her experiences before making any decisions that could affect their entire civilization. "Marcus," she spoke aloud, knowing that the human consciousness was monitoring their communications. "My people need to see what I've seen. Are you willing to make contact?" The response came immediately, space rippling near the Star Weaver as Marcus's ship materialized from whatever dimensional space it normally occupied. "I'm here, Lyralii. Whenever your people are ready." The next hour was unlike anything in Valdari history. One by one, the members of the High Council allowed themselves to be linked to the Eternal Network, their ancient minds expanding to encompass the vast collective consciousness that had grown from humanity's refusal to accept extinction. The process was different for each individual. Elder Thalis experienced it as a vast library where every book contained the lived experience of a sentient being. Councillor Veltar perceived it as a complex musical composition where each voice remained distinct while contributing to a greater harmony. Elder Morthak, with her philosophical bent, saw it as a new form of existence that transcended traditional concepts of individual identity without eliminating them. But all of them felt the same thing that Lyralii had experienced, the undeniable reality of 50 million human consciousnesses working together while maintaining their essential humanity. Impossible, Veltar whispered as the connection faded. But undeniably real. The question, Elder Morthak said thoughtfully, is whether this represents evolution or abomination. Have the humans transcended their limitations, or have they simply created a sophisticated form of collective insanity? Does it matter? Lyralii asked. They're offering us a chance to survive the Council's purge and help build something better than what currently exists. The alternative is to wait here until the extermination fleets arrive. There is another alternative, Veltar pointed out. We could negotiate with the Council directly. Offer our support in exchange for protection. Support in committing genocide, Elder the List said with disgust. The Council's plan isn't just to eliminate the humans. It's to sterilize entire sectors of space, destroying any civilization that might potentially harbor refugees or dissidents. They're proposing to murder trillions of innocent beings. Through the ship's communication system, Marcus's voice provided additional context. The Council's projections show acceptable losses of up to 40% of the galaxy's current population. They consider this a reasonable price for ensuring absolute control over the remaining civilizations. The number hit the Council chamber like a physical blow. 40% of all sentient life in the galaxy, eliminated to maintain the power structure that had ruled for 3 centuries. We cannot be party to such an atrocity, Elder Morthak declared. Whatever our reservations about these eternal, we cannot support genocide on this scale. Then, we're in agreement, Lyralii said. The only question is what form our opposition takes. Full alliance with the human network, Elder the List said without hesitation. If they're offering us equal partnership in reshaping galactic civilization, then we owe it to ourselves and every other sentient species to accept. With conditions, Veltar added. We maintain our cultural autonomy. We retain the right to withdraw if the alliance proves incompatible with our values. And we require guarantees that the Valdari will have a voice in any new governmental structure. Agreed, Marcus replied immediately. The network functions on consensus, not domination. Your people's experience and wisdom would be invaluable in designing systems that protect individual freedom while enabling cooperation on a galactic scale. The formal vote was a formality. When faced with a choice between genocide and revolution, the Valdari High Council chose revolution by a unanimous margin. Then, it's decided, Lyralii announced. We stand with the Eternal. Councillor Veltar, begin immediate preparations for evacuating our most vulnerable populations to secure locations. Elder the List, coordinate with the human network to identify how our technologies can best contribute to the defense effort. Elder Morthak, prepare a formal declaration of our position for transmission to other exile governments. As her council dispersed to carry out their assignments, Lyralii found herself alone with Marcus's presence through the communication link. Are you ready for this? He asked quietly. I've been ready for 3 centuries, she replied. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for what we're about to unleash. The galaxy doesn't have a choice, Marcus said grimly. The Council's timeline has accelerated. Our intelligence indicates that the first sterilization fleets will launch within 72 hours. Then, we'd better make those hours count. What followed was a period of frantic activity unlike anything Lyralii had experienced since the original war. The Eternal Network came alive with coordinated action as hundreds of hidden bases and thousands of concealed ships revealed themselves throughout the galaxy. Species that had been quietly preparing for rebellion suddenly found themselves with the support and coordination they needed to act openly. The first blow came at the Council's primary shipyards in the Centauri system, where a fleet of mysterious vessels appeared as if from nowhere and began systematically disabling the extermination ships before they could launch. The attackers used no conventional weapons, instead employing some form of energy manipulation that simply caused the massive vessels to shut down as if their entire technological infrastructure had been turned off. Phase disruption fields, Marcus explained as they watched the reports come in. We learned to exist partially outside normal spacetime. Now we can extend that effect to other objects, essentially placing them in a state where their own technology can't function. The second blow was even more devastating.
Across 12 sectors simultaneously, Council communication networks went silent as the Eternals' infiltration programs activated.
3 centuries of carefully placed software modifications suddenly revealed themselves, turning the Council's own information systems into weapons against them. Every military order is being intercepted and modified, Elena Vasquez reported through the network link. Their ships are receiving false coordinates, obsolete intelligence, and contradictory commands. By the time they realize what's happening, their entire command structure will be paralyzed. But the most significant development wasn't military. As word of the revolution spread, species that had been subjugated for centuries began to remember what freedom felt like. The Altarian Confederacy formally declared independence and offered to join the growing alliance. The Zephyrian Mining Consortium revealed that they controlled 3 times as many systems as the Council had realized. Trade guilds throughout the galaxy went on strike simultaneously, cutting off the flow of resources that kept the Council's war machine functioning. "It's working," Dr. Okafor observed through the link as reports continued to pour in. The Council's power was always based on the assumption that resistance was impossible. Now that we've proven that assumption wrong, their entire system is collapsing. But Lyralii knew that cornered predators were often the most dangerous. "They're not going to surrender quietly," she warned. "If they can't maintain control through conventional means, they'll try to hold on to power through terror." Her prediction proved accurate within hours. Unable to coordinate their extermination fleets, the Council resorted to a desperate gambit. Using weapons that had been banned since the galactic wars of the ancient era, they began indiscriminate bombardments of systems where eternal activity had been detected. The first target was New Geneva, a trade hub in the Outer Territories. The Council's remaining loyalist forces simply sterilized the entire system, destroying not just the Eternal installations but also the 12 billion civilians who had been living there peacefully. "Monsters," Elder the Lys breathed as the reports came in. "They're willing to destroy everything rather than lose control." "Then, we stop them," Lyralii said with cold fury. "Marcus, what do you need from us?" "Everything you can give us," he replied. "The Council has decided to go down fighting, which means this war is going to get very ugly very quickly. But we have one advantage they don't expect. Which is? We're fighting for something worth saving. They're just fighting to maintain their privilege." The final phase of the revolution was brutal and decisive. The Eternal Network, now openly supported by dozens of species and representing nearly half the galaxy's population, moved against the Council's remaining strongholds with coordinated precision. Not seeking conquest, but liberation. Not demanding submission, but offering choice. The siege of the Council's central government complex lasted 3 days. When it ended, the galaxy had a new structure. Not a single governing body imposing its will on unwilling subjects, but a confederation of free species working together by choice rather than compulsion. "It's over," Marcus said as they stood together on the observation deck of the Star Weaver, watching as Council ships throughout the galaxy either surrendered or were peacefully disabled by Eternal forces. "No," Lyralii replied, taking his hand. "It's just beginning." She was right. Building a free galaxy would prove to be much more difficult than liberating one. But, as she looked out at the stars, feeling the vast network of consciousness that now spanned half the known universe, she knew that they would find a way. After all, some promises transcend death itself. And the promise of freedom, once made, can never truly be unmade. The age of the Council was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And, in the center of it all, 2 beings who had loved across the void found themselves with eternity to explore what that love might become.